Welcome to one-on-one special profiling of the candidates for this year's 2014 election cycle. And today we have in the studio Delegate Addie Eckardt, but you're not a candidate for the delegate, you're a candidate for the Maryland Senate.
Right.
Isn't that exciting?
Yes, it is exciting, and good morning to you, Phil.
Well, it's nice to have you in the studio.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity.
We're going to assume, Addie, that there might be 5 or 6 people in the audience who don't know who you are and don't know of your background or anything else. So let's just start from scratch for those people who might have moved here from Butte, Montana. And tell us a little bit about your background before politics.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that, and I'll try to condense it so it isn't all 6 pages. Just kidding aside. First of all, I live in Dorchester County in beautiful downtown Cambridge on the creek, and we've lived there for a very long time. I'm a registered nurse. In fact, I'm an advanced practice clinical nurse specialist. Psychiatric nursing is my area of expertise, and I have practiced that for 40 years or more, primarily at the local state hospital, Eastern Shore Hospital Center. And then I got into politics because one of my patients' moms was on the Central Committee, and she decided that I had been so involved in community activities and well known in the community, I should run for the Central Committee, whatever that was. I did not know at that point in time. So I ran for the Republican Central Committee and convinced everybody, because we had started a health planning organization, that I was a good organizer, and I thought I could get the organization going. But they were going to have to do the legwork because I worked full-time and was going to school and involved in a lot of organizations. So we did that, and for 8 years I was chair of the Republican Central Committee in Dorchester County, which was a really fun time to build the party activity. Once we did what the Central Committees do, which is registered voters, try to get people to be persuaded to register Republican, and then run candidates and be the party organization, we decided we really needed to have a lot of Republican candidates. So it was at that time that we all had to run for another office in addition to the Central Committee. And in 1990, I ran for the Maryland House of Delegates and lost. After knocking on 10,000 doors, you would think I would win, but it didn't work that way because there were 2 of us in Dorchester County, and we split the vote. And the other guy, the kid, went in from Talbot County, Ken Schisler. I was discouraged, but I decided after about a year it was time to pick it up again. Picked it up. We were still on the Central Committee building the party, and then we went ahead to victory in 1994, and at that time we had Republican candidates who won in the local race for county commissioner, and the whole 37 district was Republican at that point in time. So since that time I've continued to practice nursing. I do some school health nursing and some Alzheimer's work, and particularly work more with policy and the implications of healthcare reform. At the same time, I do my regular duties as a delegate, but this year I decided to run for the Senate.
Good. Tell us a little bit about the demographics of District 37.
Sure. It's a very rural area. We have all of Talbot County, all of Dorchester County, a third of Caroline County now that the redistricting has taken place. So that's pretty much Preston and Federalsburg. And then 50%, 1/2 of Wycomico County. So I covered territory kind of from below 404 up in coming down Route 50 all the way out to Tillman Island, and then straight on down to the airport in Salisbury, and that includes all of the water districts. And I call the water districts places like Nanticoke, Bivalve, Tyascan, Hooper's Island, Elliott's Island, all of Tillman Island, Oxford, St. Michael's, all of those areas. I think there's probably close to 28 or more towns and municipalities there are probably at least 28 fire companies in the district. And of course, then you have 4 chambers and 4 farm bureaus and 4 arts councils and 4 of everything else that every county has.
How much, if any, of Salisbury is in 37?
Around Fruitland, and there's some right in downtown Salisbury, because remember 37A and B come right down into Salisbury proper.
Yeah.
In and around the Armory, and then back downtown a little bit over to Riverside.
Yeah. So each one of those, or not each one, some of those towns have water and sewer, central water and central sewer, all state issues in a way. Many of them are on rivers and creeks,
Right.
And so, and the Chesapeake Bay, part
Right.
of the
Chesapeake Bay is the
if you
major
have St. Michael's.
estuary, right? And so there are a lot of, you're exactly right, there are a lot of major infrastructure concerns with water and sewer. In fact, when I was first elected, I was unaware that in our district, many of our residents weren't hooked up. So right in Dorchester County, we had a part of a community. It was East New Market. Part of East New Market was hooked up to water and sewer, and the other part was not. And that was one of the first projects to get it across Route 16, so the other community would have access.
Do they still have community development block grants?
Yes.
That's still something that
CDBG funds are still available for the kind of infrastructure needs communities have. And then you have some federal monies that are also available. They're shrinking, as we've gone through the recession, and there have been a lot of changes. But yes, when we're talking about major water infrastructure, that's very important. And I think that's one of the critical issues here in Wicomico County. As I've studied it through the years, our regional council has looked at that. How do you have a coordinated wastewater treatment? How far out do you go? What about Hebron? What about Mardella Springs? What about all the way down to the end of Nanticoke Road? Because you have a lot of septic systems and concerns about critical areas in septic systems, the same way in Dorchester County and in Talbot.
Yeah, and all of that, state planning, the planning part of that comes into play,
right?
Because do you plan around water and sewer, central water and sewer growth, or do you allow growth to occur without?
Growth.
Yeah, well,
all the smart growth, the thinking with smart growth that you provide incentives for people to go ahead if you're going to build a development to do some kind of a wastewater treatment system. But then if you expand it out with your towns, then you hope that the development is contained within those areas. But as you know, folks on the Eastern Shore, we're rugged individualists, and people like their space and their privacy and being out in the country. So it's a major issue. We have a number of projects, people thinking about doing projects, major projects in the area. And one of the things that I've thought about, it wouldn't be neat if we had a checklist, kind of a blue ribbon checklist that places like Horn Point and other folks would have input into developing, so that you could give that template to an individual or a developer or whoever coming in and say, these are the things that are specific to this area, issues that need to be addressed to be able to be successful in whatever they're doing.
Sure, that sounds like a good idea.
Something I have in the back of my head that I've talked about for when we go to Annapolis.
Well, what are the major issues in this upcoming election? Not just for the Senate, but for the whole state.
Sure, major concerns are the economy, and that translates down into jobs. How do we have, or it translates into money from my perspective. How do we have enough funds to be able to sort the needs of the citizens in a jurisdiction? And that means people have to be gainfully employed. And how do we do that? So economic development is a major issue. But as you know, with the recession, the shore has not quite rebounded. So you have folks out there still struggling, with bankruptcy, mortgage issues, looking for jobs. Many places are still downsizing. So folks have been laid off and they're looking for employment. So how do we think about developing economically? What kind of businesses do we bring in? And that's where the counties really need to work through their own strategic planning in conjunction with the regional councils in economic development and like the Greater Salisbury or other groups to be able to determine through their county plan what we want to be, how will we bring in and educate our students so that we can go ahead and grow jobs. Now, healthcare is a ripe area to do that, and there have been a number of initiatives. I can't say I'm really excited about how these were passed in Annapolis or all the elements of it, but we're trying to work it through with and earn a way to just keep developing the state workforce, because you have people aging out, you have teachers aging out, you have health professionals aging out. We have a shortage with our health professionals. How do we recruit and retain those individuals? How do we recruit and retain existing business like manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing, which is really changed? As healthcare moves into the community, there's a lot of opportunity for business in the community as opposed to people who've been working in a hospital, and that's a whole different set of skills. So our workforce has to be prepared, and we're working with Salisbury University, as you know, and Warwick Community College, Chesapeake College, to be able to look at how we do that shorewide. You have Wallops Island, you have the whole creation of the engineering field with the exciting space initiatives that are taking place, and that could really grow the economy. People like the Eastern Shore. It's a healthy place to live, but we have to have the infrastructure to be able to make that happen. So being wired and connected with our broadband and get it out to the last mile. And then our roads and bridges, which are not in very good shape right now, so that we can have the kind of commerce that we need. All of those are things, and an education system, a good quality education system, are things that a community needs to think about. The region has to work together to be able to determine the priorities as we move forward, going back into session in January.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of those issues you mentioned and the solutions are locally inspired. Mm-hmm. How does the state government, how is the state government involved in some of those things? I guess support of the Warwick Community College would be one way.
That's one of them, but there have been several things that are, you can say what you will about healthcare reform, and there are a lot of aspects of that I think are not going to work, and I'm still concerned about, the premiums continuing to escalate, and so the average person won't be able to afford health care, and yet we've expanded, so that people who don't have much income are able to get access. They're good things, but there are all problems with that. But I think as we continue to develop that workforce, one of the things that we have pushed for in Annapolis is to look for local solutions. So through the Community Health Resources organization at the state, they took some of the money, the federal money for healthcare reform, and then gave it back to the communities and say, okay, you have high pockets of poverty, you have high incidence of folks with diabetes and folks with coronary artery disease and folks with behavioral health issues over here. Why don't you develop some kind of a system to deliver health to these folks, and in the process create more jobs for health professionals? And that was called the Health Enterprise Zone. And so they got a lot of wonderful ideas. Everyone's unique, and we have one on the shore. And that was a pilot to see how the locals could use the funds that were allotted to them based on the plan that they put forward, and then report that back. And I can tell you that in Dorchester County, we have been able to reduce hospital emergency visits, and we've been able to expand health services to quite a few citizens. And that's been a positive thing through the community healthcare workers that are so there's a whole new group of healthcare providers that are being brought in to be kind of supporters, coaches to individuals, because many in the health field have realized that, for somebody who has a very difficult diabetes to maintain, has behavioral health issues, also has some coronary artery disease or hypertensive on top of that, you tell them, here's your medicine, here's your diet, go home and do it. Now, most of us don't stick to an exercise regime until we have some built-in accountability. So we're finding now that there needs to be more accountability in the mix because of many of our lifestyle dilemmas, if you will. So, but that gives the local jurisdiction a way to be creative. In Dorchester County and in Caroline County, they brought 18 different organizations together to put that proposal together. And I was very encouraged by that, and the people who were participating are very excited. The downside is that it's a heck of a lot of paper tracking, and it will drive you crazy because a lot of times the state changes their mind at every whip stitch. So just when you think you've got on paper what they want, they change it and have a different variation. So that's an issue for another day we're going to have to work out. But the earned grants have been another initiative. So I think providing incentives for local jurisdictions to solve their own problems, identify their own dilemmas, and then solve them is a much better way to go. And I really wish we could do that even with funding. Caroline County commissioners have said for years, I want Dover Bridge and we want 404. Do not give us a little bit of money for this and a little bit of money for that and a little bit of money. We want those two priorities, and we will sacrifice a lot of other things if you will make that happen. And that sounds good to me. But there are a lot of there are historic tax credits, and there's this tax credit, and there's this program in heritage areas, and a lot of economic development programs out there where there's money put into those funds to be able to make things happen. But this county said, hey, let's hold off on all of that. Just target the money to what we need.
Well, if you ask the Wicomico County government what they'd just like to have the money from the highway user tax restored to the fair share that we were accustomed to getting.
That's exactly right, and that's what we've all said. There's one thing, and last year when I went into the session, that was my big priority, to make sure we could restore that. And so there were several different bills put in to do that, and none passed. I mean, I think there was some $10 million put in for pothole repair, and some given, there was $10 million the year before given back to municipalities, but not to counties. And then there was this additional amount for potholes that would be available immediately. But I believe, I will certainly put in legislation or look for a way of restoring those, at least to put a planned, restoration. But the issue is they really need to separate out mass transit from highway user revenues and find a source of funding for mass transit. I truly believe that, and we've never bitten that bullet. When they had the study committee, it was threw it back on the locals and said, well, locals, if you want to do a transportation authority, go ahead and tax your citizens and go ahead and do that. And I don't think they were reasonable solutions, because I think it's a statewide issue that has to be addressed. And the rural areas fall short, and I don't believe get their fair share. So if we align their priorities, if we restore the funding, that's certainly a reasonable approach to take.
Tell us what committees you served on in the House and what committees you would like to serve on in the Senate.
Right. The first 8 years in the Maryland General Assembly and the House of Delegates, I served on economic matters with Mike Bush and Mike Gordon. And at that point in time, we did insurance, housing. It was pretty much a business committee. There was also at that time environmental matters. So we did a lot of the health insurance piece. Environmental matters covered health professionals, so we would do joint projects depending on the bill. And then we also interface sometimes with, it was CGM, Commerce and Governmental Matters, because they would get much more of the banking issues. So that was a good committee to work on to understand, real estate and cemeteries and all types of insurance and special lines of insurance and coverage, and housing and community development was in there as well. Then my third term, I went over to appropriations, a budget committee, and I've served on the budget committee for the past, 3-4 terms. And I've been on the Health and Human Services, probably because of my state employee background. I know a lot about the retirement system, and I know a lot about the personnel system, probably because I used it as a supervisor, for years before I was a clinical specialist in the workplace, and understand state government and know the health department and all the agencies, and Department of Health and Human Resources well, and then Housing and Development, and then Children, Youth, and Families activity. All of that comes into appropriations. We're small. They're like a chair and a co-chair, and then probably 5 or 6 others. So there are only a maximum of 7 or 8 on those subcommittees on the budget committee of the House. And that's where I know that I have input there as I understand the health delivery system. So we work very carefully with regard to the funding issues to try to maintain that balance. So there is a strong opportunity to have your voice heard there. The reason why I thought the Senate would be a good next step for me, because A, there are no health professionals in the Senate. So the nurses that were there in prior years are no longer there. Paul Hollinger was there, and then we had 3 nurses in the House. Currently, we have 3 nurses in the House, but no physician or health anything over in the Senate. So I thought with healthcare reform, and I know that's going to be a very bumpy road, and with a lot of implications, it would be a good time to be in the Senate and be able to work on a smaller committee. Finance does the insurance piece of it, and that's a great committee to be on. Budget and tax is a combination of appropriations, the budget committee, and then the taxing committee. So you get both of those issues in one committee. Then there's health, education, and environment, and then there's judiciary. And I've never been on judiciary, but I would.
There's plenty of
probably
lawyers available for that, I guess.
Yes, but that's an important committee for somebody who's in law enforcement who understands the state process or the court system as well. That would be a good placement. Environmental matters deals with all the Department of Natural Resources, environment, some health-related health professionals in that as well. But I think I would like to go to finance just because of those health insurance-related issues where I think is going to be, in hospital payment systems and things like that.
For 20 years, you've been able to observe the Maryland Senate from across the hall. Describe the Maryland Senate. How do you tell people what it's like?
What's a smaller body? Out of the 188 members of the Maryland General Assembly, 141 are in the House, and the others are in the Senate. So it's small. When I've been to committees, it's been interesting because when I've gone to present a bill, there might only be 4 people in the room. And that I found that curious. Maybe you get 6. I've never presented a bill to the Senate, even the most controversial ones, that everybody was in their seat. Well, I'd take that back. There was one when we were doing alcohol and candy. You know, those little cordials, those chocolates that have cordials in them. Oh. I had a bill, and everybody knew I might bring a sample, and so everybody was there that day.
What it takes to get a crowd.
Yeah, I know, and I didn't know they knew that, except I was dangling it. Yeah, I wanted everybody to be in the committee, so that was a good way to get them there. We did get the bill passed that year, and, you know, we didn't have as many kids. They were afraid kids were going to get access to it. My kids are making all these synthetic things these days. They're not going to fool with that. But anyway, yeah, and I thought that's interesting. You know, in the House, you know, we're always so
crowded.
Well, we're not crowded. People show up for committee, and they are attentive and ask a lot of questions, and you don't miss. You know, you wouldn't think of missing a committee hearing. And I know there are a lot of other things going on when you're presenting a lot of bills, reasons why people are not in the committee, but it's smaller. But there's been this sense that everybody's very independent. Now, I do know for a fact that the Senate has less rules. There's something called the third reader rule, that in the House, if a bill goes through the committee, it's preferred that nobody speak against that bill on the House floor. Even if you were of the opposing side when the vote was taken in committee, you keep quiet about that when it goes to the House floor. Well, from my experience, there have been some bills that would be very hard for me to do, because I had majored, particularly a Senate bill. There was a Senate bill that came through that affected our school system that I just couldn't believe it passed. And it passed because there were no health professionals, and they did not really bring the school health nurses in to talk about the implications of the bill. And it was at that point that I thought, they'll pass anything over there. You know, and then we have to do the due diligence over on the House side. So that's one of the things that I thought, well, maybe if I'm there as a health professional, maybe some of these things might not get through as easily. Or if they do, they will cover the bases so that they wouldn't be as costly time or money to our already over-mandated education systems.
Is there a part of the Senate, well, obviously, those parts of the state that are represented, that are rural? Mm-hmm. Obviously, with the so-called Big Seven, but the central part of the state dominate the House of Delegates, and also dominate as far as votes. But is there like a coalition of rural folks?
There is, and it's the Rural Caucus. And I've had the opportunity of chairing that through this past year. We take turns chairing that from the House perspective. Does that include Senate and House? It does include senators, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it's important when we have an issue that's significant to all of us that we do have everybody at the table. Mm-hmm. And when it's controversial, we'll even get some of the city people coming because they want to learn about it. We started a Watermen's Caucus this last year, and that we found very helpful, not only for the watermen to come up on Monday night. Delegate Jay Jacobs has chaired that. And that's a great forum for fisheries to come up and talk about what's happening. And it's a good opportunity for other delegates who know nothing about fisheries to hear from the watermen themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's been a good way to educate people from both perspectives. And I think taking advantage of that and making sure that the Senate is involved in that would be very important moving forward.
Yeah. And agribusiness, how does agribusiness make their voice heard in Annapolis? Through their rural senators and rural delegates?
Well, and you have a number of things, because we also have our county councils, like the Lower Shore Tri-County Council, Mid-Shore Regional Council. all of the jurisdictions have those councils now, and they have been wonderful ways to highlight, along with Rural Council. There's a Maryland Rural Council. I happen to serve on that as well, to make sure that we highlight all of the diversification that's happening right now, like in farming, or as you said, agribusiness.
Yeah.
When I do my bike tour to kick off the campaign in August, we will be looking at alpaca farms.
Oh my goodness.
Because we have a growing group of folks who are growing and raising alpacas. There are several in Wicomico, and I thought there was only one in Caroline, but there are more than that. So I'm finding this just from constituents. We have a buffalo, ranch, and they're flourishing, but all of those niche farming areas are really important, not only with what we would call agritourism, agribusiness, but it just makes good use of our open space and land, and continue to make sure that agriculture thrives, because we certainly get bombarded with all of the phosphorus management stuff that's coming out, and the water quality and environmental issues, and poultry, and just all of it. I hope that in the future we can really value our agriculture in a different way. With the Hudson case on the lower shore, that was a very unfortunate situation where people went ahead and jumped to conclusions without really strong data and evidence to support what the reality was. And we were able to carve out some money in the budget to create an ag law clinic, and found that the Extension Service, UMES, the University of Maryland, and the University of Maryland Law Center, people who had been involved in environmental issues had never talked to each other. So we've gotten them together, and now we're moving forward with a whole inventory of services that I believe is going to be the footprint for what we can do in the future with a development and a branding of a strong agriculture law center. The University of Maryland has also instituted a number of measures, the law school, so that they have advisory boards and different screening tools before a student just gets an instructor or one of their mentors to go off with an issue. So now that there are criteria that has to be ranked and looked at. So that's a very good thing moving forward, to be more like Delaware in looking at, if we are going to be a food producer on the shore, we need to recognize that, celebrate that, and then take according action to be able to make sure everybody believes and values that business.
We've run out of time, but I want to give you time to look in the camera and say whatever you want to say to the voters of District 37.
Thank you very much. It's been indeed a privilege for me to serve in the Maryland General Assembly and the House of Delegates, and I have been just overwhelmed with the recommendations from citizens saying, Addie, you really need to try and run for the Senate. And this year I did it. Thank you, everybody who's been coaching me for years. It's been a wonderful opportunity. There has been so much energy and ideas and willingness to work together with some very difficult issues that I look forward to winning the election November the 4th and serving you as your senator in Annapolis.
Well, thank you, Addie Eckardt, for being with us.
Welcome.
Certainly best wishes to you and your family, and thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
And thanks for serving our state.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us on this special segment of One on One right here on PAC 14.